right here in Morocco. That's where the whole thing started. At least I thought it started here, because this is where I was born 16 years ago. These are the first streets I ever walked in. The first things I saw when I was a kid. They still look pretty much the same. I didn't even know there was more going on than I could see with my eyes until we moved to Casablanca. That was quite a town. New buildings, wide streets, and billboards. How I hated those billboards and posters. Not because of what was written on them, because of what was hidden behind them. Behind the old wall, in the ghetto. That's where we lived. All the Jews who were too poor to live in the new city. And that's where I found out about another wall. A wall between us and other people. It wasn't a wall you could see or touch, but it was there just the same. And every Jewish kid felt it. Take my brother Dan. He's only 9. A baby who plays with tops. A baby closed in by a wall of hate thousands of years older than he is. In the ghetto, a kid like Dan couldn't stick to anything very long. He got restless. He had to keep moving. He always had an eye out for something. I remember once when he found what he wanted. Something to eat. Bread. Poor Dan. He just about made it home. I couldn't bear to see how Papa felt, and I felt sorry for Dan. Was it his fault that he was hungry enough to steal bread? It wasn't Papa's fault either. No matter how hard he worked, there was never enough for all of us at mealtime. Everything about our lives seemed rotten. And I was old enough, not sad, but bitter enough to know that it had to do with our being Jews in exile. I had already arranged to go to the land where Jews were people, not ghetto-bait. I had signed up with Youth Aliyah, an organization that was taking Jewish children to Israel. The day that Dan stole the bread, Papa decided to send him along with me. I'll never forget the morning Dan and I started out. I kept thinking, you can leave the ghetto forever. You can leave forever. The truth is, I was worried. Suppose they wouldn't let me take Dan along. I tried not to think about it. I acted as though everything was settled. First, he'd need some snapshots for his identity papers. If you think Dan worried for even a minute, you just don't know my brother. But all the way over there, I was wondering what to do if they said no at Youth Aliyah. I was, well, just plain scared to go inside. But we had a lucky break. Another boy had dropped out at the last minute. Dan could go in his place. It was just a matter of an examination and a few papers, and all our troubles would be over. Please God, as Papa would say. wasn't as easy as it sounded. You see, I'd never been to a doctor before, and those needles made me a little sick, although I tried not to show it. And then, clothes. Brand new clothes. And shoes. Good shoes. Worth 1,000 francs a pair at least. The best part of it was the feeling that these things were not charity, but more like a present from a brother or sister. They even helped the younger kids put their things on. Once we got all straightened out, we were on our own. And that was nothing new for us. So we did just what we would have done in the ghetto. I didn't know it was wrong. Without even thinking what it meant, I won all of Dan's money. That night, Dan sneaked out and sold his new clothes. To a kid brought up in the ghetto, that's the way you get money, if you're smart. The next morning, though, Dan didn't feel so smart. His old clothes seemed like an insult to our new comrades. I didn't feel so smart either, because it really was my fault. After all, I was supposed to take care of him. Instead, I let him get into trouble. I wouldn't let him take the blame alone. I told him about winning Dan's money in the card game. I was used to punishment, and I was sure they'd send us both back to the ghetto. But they gave us another chance, and they gave Dan some more clothes, and they let us join in the celebration before leaving for Israel. In a way, I could hardly believe the whole thing. You see, we had never before met people like the Youth Aliyah. Dan was in the middle of things, naturally. But he, too, felt a difference in the way we were being treated. For once, he was in the middle of something good. Maybe, in a setup like this, maybe we could keep out of trouble. And, because there was a new kind of hope in the air, Dan put on a show of his own. I couldn't help feeling proud of him. After all, I taught him those tricks. A little while later, they started giving out the passports. Then I saw that we weren't going to Israel alone. We were sailing with a lot of regular immigrants, whole families. I was homesick for my family. Then they called out my name. And guess what? I was the one they had picked to take care of all the kids in my group. They trusted me. That does something to a guy. We drove to the harbor in buses, and all during that ride, I kept telling myself over and over again, you're leaving forever. And suddenly I was afraid again. Forever is a long time. Would things really work out for us? Would everything be all right in Israel? The minute we started to go aboard, my fear disappeared. Maybe it was the ship with its name in Hebrew. Maybe it was the flag. My flag now. Whatever it was, we all felt it. We could hardly wait for the trip to be over. With everyone up on deck, it came into view. Mount Carmel. Israel. Home. Our home from now on. After we docked in Haifa, we left the immigrant families. They were going to settle on farms. We were headed for a Youth Aliyah colony called Ma'aleh HaChamishah. I never dreamed in Morocco that such a place could exist. A strange kid should be so glad to have us in their village. Could be so friendly. They had real houses, made of cement, with walls and doors and windows, just for us children. Oh, Papa, I wish you could see this. Here, Dan and I had 2 beds, more than the whole family at home. We were so excited that, well, I guess we just didn't think that work, hard work, was also part of this life. We acted like, I'm ashamed to have to say it, but it's true. We acted like a couple of kids from the ghetto, slipping back into the old ways. It really was a new life for us, and we still had a lot to learn. Our first lesson came early the next morning when Shlomo, the camp leader, woke us up. He made us all take showers. Then we had to have exercise. Who ever heard of exercise in the ghetto? In the dining room, well, we even had to learn how to hold our knives and forks. Then came school. For us, it wasn't easy. We weren't used to figuring things out with a piece of chalk or a pencil. We had learned a different way in the ghetto where we were forced to do all our figuring in our heads. And we were scared to admit that this way might be better. Because we didn't know this way. Dan got embarrassed in front of the class. And when one of the kids made a joke about it, Dan made a note of that in his head. I didn't even try to stop him because I didn't know any better. In the ghetto, fighting is how you win your self-respect. And it's not easy to get over those old habits. That's why I acted the way I did when they sent us out to work. You see, in Casablanca, to shovel fertilizer is a disgrace. Here it's one of 1,000 jobs, all of which have to be done. Otherwise, there can be no Israel. I just didn't understand it at first. Shlomo understood it, and he understood us. He didn't scold us or punish us. He just gave us a different job the next time. We did the same thing all over again. Yes, me too. In fact, I was sort of the ringleader. The truth is, we were afraid. Afraid we wouldn't do the job right. Afraid we wouldn't measure up to the others. Instead of admitting it, we had to make believe we were tough. Tough. How tough do you have to be to play cards instead of working? We were kidding ourselves and we didn't even know it. And if you want to see how tough we really were, look what we did when Shlomo turned up unexpectedly. We wondered if he would try to get back at us. He did. At least, that's what we thought. A couple of days later, the whole camp was supposed to go out on an excursion. They all went. Except my gang. That was hard to take. We had to make believe we didn't care. But something was happening to us. Even though we wouldn't come right out and say so, we all felt that we hadn't made the grade. Dan tried to cover up his feelings by showing off. That was the worst mistake of all. But somehow, that started clearing up things. Dan and I had a long talk. I felt awful. I was his big brother, and instead of protecting him, I had gotten him into trouble time and again. I was afraid they would send us back to the ghetto. That was one thing we didn't want. Yes, something had happened. We were beginning to love this land, and our village, and our people. When Shlomo got back from the excursion, we went to see him to let him know how he felt. I couldn't make a word come out of my mouth. Shlomo just looked at the cigarettes and cards and smiled. Then I knew he would never send us back home. But we felt so ashamed for all the trouble we had given him, we practically crawled out of the room. After that, Dan and I really pitched in and worked. We felt we had to make up for the time we had wasted, lost. And what had seemed like senseless labor before now became familiar, good, right somehow. There was plenty to do, always. But the funny thing was that the harder I worked, the more I got out of it. Because for once in my life, I felt I was doing something important. Youth Aliyah taught me that by making me find it out for myself. We all felt the same way. We all worked hard. Dan was so proud of his garden that he moved all the signs from the lawn to the cabbages. To protect them, he said. Poor Dan. He couldn't read yet. He didn't understand why Shlomo laughed. The next time there was an excursion, it was different. This time we went along, too. You can't imagine how we felt. We looked at and listened to everything. The word Israel was no longer a name. It was trees and fields, earth and countryside, everything. Shlomo showed us the Jeru's corridor, with all the new settlements in the valley and all the villages on the hillside. He took us to the frontier to see the buildings shelled by the Arabs during the war. And now that was our war, too. We, too, had won our independence. Later, I was working by myself when Shlomo came along. He had something very special for me to do. He wanted me to take charge of the gardens and the grounds. All of them. Me. I could hardly believe my ears. Imagine me, the troublemaker from Casablanca, in charge of all the grounds of a Youth Aliyah colony in Israel. This almond tree, these gardens and fields, all of these were mine now, ours. My brother and I had a country now, a place where we really belonged. Can you understand what this meant to me? Dan came running when he heard the news, but I hardly knew he was there. My head was filled with dreams. I could be Samson and Joseph and Maccabeus now, because Israel believed in me. I was so excited I didn't even realize what I was doing until Dan brought me to my senses. And then I knew. Then I really knew that we had changed. The old mistakes must never happen again. No more cigarettes, no more cards, no more ghetto, and none of its ways. That is all over now. We're home, Danny. We've finally come home. And we're here to stay.